Hello everyone, welcome to today's video where I'm going to take a look at my fourth round game from the Chennai Open category A being held from 2nd to the 9th of January. So I was playing a guy named Dhananjay. Is a pretty strong guy. He's like 2270 rate, and I was playing with the black pieces, and I wanted to like fight for a win in this game. And so he started with d4 c5, knight f3 d6, and I was apprehending he is going to play d4 because I saw some of his online games where he continued with cd4 and queen d4, a pretty interesting variation, like developing his queen first into the game, which is not very principled, but it is what it is. It was first popularized by Carlsen. It's, I think, known as the Carlsen variation or something like that. It was popularized in 2018 or something. I'm not so sure, but yeah, anyways, after knight c6 the main variation is bishop b5, but my opponent decided to go for queen e3, and I played g6, bishop a2, bishop g4, trying to exchange off the f3 knight and play on these weakened central dark squares of white. And my opponent played castles. I played bishop g7, and after rook d1 I went queen b6. Well, actually my plan was to play knight f6, but it doesn't work here concretely because white can go e5, and my queen is pinned on d8. So I wanted to exchange off the queens and hitting the b2 pawn. Like I'm threatening to go queen e3, and after bishop e3 I'm going to take the pawn on b2. So my opponent went for queen b6. Maybe something like c3 would have been more accurate for him, because taking on b6 voluntarily opens up my a file, and my rook is pretty active now, and he has some problem in developing his dark square bishop because he has to always guard this b2 pawn. Anyways, after c3 white is planning to play bishop e3, hitting the b6 pawn, so I immediately went for knight f6, hitting the e4 pawn, and after knight e2 you will notice how this bishop on c1 is feeling very unhappy. After knight d7, trying to reroute my ep to the c5 square and put some pressure on the a2 pawn. My opponent went for knight d4, which is a very concrete move actually. I don't know, maybe something like a3 would have been a better choice, but already like it kind of weakens this b3 square, and like I can go for something like king d7 and rook c8, and I don't know, maybe b5 b4 in the future with some preparation. But anyways, I understand completely my opponent wanted to simplify the position immediately because his pieces are a bit more passive. And after knight d4 I was considering knight takes d4 for a long time, but after bishop g4, knight c2, rook b1, rook a2, my ep on the c2 square is kind of doesn't have any square, and after knight b3 I think my ep is kind of going to be lost because rook d2, there is no way I can protect against rook d2 and rook takes c2. I'm not so sure. Yeah, so yeah, I'm losing my piece. So after bishop e2, knight e2, I went for b5, trying to just break open this h8 a1 diagonal, and my dragon bishop is going to have a lot of juice on that diagonal actually. So after b5 my opponent went for a3 and I went b4, and after cb4, knight b4, my juicer on the g7 square is so happy. My opponent went for rook knight b3, now attacking my ep on b4 and like protecting the a1 rook, because otherwise like after a b4 the a1 rook was falling. But after knight b3 I have to move back my knight. Well, I had three choices here: knight c2, knight c6 and knight s6, and they are very complicated actually. After knight c2, rook b1 I can go castles, but after something like bishop d2, rook c1 and rook c8, rook c1, black is going to play bishop c3 next, and my knight, I don't think I can save my knight in this position. And I was also considering knight a6, but something like a3, this takes, and now bishop e3 maybe. No, bishop e3 the b2 pawn is falling, but yeah, maybe rook b1 simply, and after king d7, bishop e3, rook c8. I mean, black should be slightly better here, but the position should be objectively equal. So I decided to go for knight c6 back, and my idea was to go castles and play rook c8 and try to penetrate along the c file, because white is going to take some time to develop his bishop, because the b2 pawn is always in pre. So after rook b1 I played castles, and after bishop d2 I went for b5, immediately striking in the queen side. My idea was after bishop c3 I can take, and now knight c3, and this position is very comfortable for me as black, and I am going to go just rook f8 and try to pile up upon the b2 pawn, and I'm just very happy in this position. But my opponent played rook dc1 and I played rook c8. I was for a long time considering knight d5, but it wasn't working for some concrete reasons. But after rook c8, rook c2 was played, and after knight e5, now my opponent went for knight c3. Actually, this is a very like my opponent had told me after the game that he initially planned to go rook bc1, but he had missed this nice move knight d3, and the point is after rook takes c6, knight takes c1, rook takes c1. Well, if rook c8, bishop c1, then I have rook c2, and I'm grabbing this pawn on b2. Let's say after king f1 takes, and now the a3 pawn is going to fall very soon, but I'm not so sure. Maybe knight c1 is the move here, but anyways, I'm the one trying to push for a win in this position, I believe. But anyways, for white it's a very risky position, and that's why my opponent decided to refrain from going rook c1. Actually, maybe if he played rook c1 I would have thought about knight d3, of course. I mean, I had seen knight d3 is a move, but I didn't know if it's working. Maybe knight c4 is another try for me, but I mean, after bishop c3 I don't know what I was going to do. Maybe something like knight e5 and knight d3 next, but maybe here even takes, and now knight d4 is coming. So it's a very complicated position. I had to think over the board what I would have done. I am not so sure what I would have done now. So he played knight c3, which came as a pleasant surprise for me, because I could play for I could press more in this position now, and I played rook b8, protecting the b5 pawn. Actually, his idea was to go knight d5 and also knight takes b5. So the point was after b4 he has knight d5, and ba3, knight b6 is a fork, and after a2 it doesn't make any point. White can just go rook a1, and now either of my rooks are falling, and I will be an exchange down, and this pawn will be gobbled up very soon by white. So after rook b8, my opponent went for knight a2, and I went knight d3, trying to play b4 next. My opponent went for bishop c3, and I went b4 and bishop g7, and here I was almost going to play b takes e3, which actually is a blunder, because there is knight d4, and after something like knight d4, rook c8, bishop d4, I have I'm just a piece down in this position, to be honest. And if I go for something like rook b2, I believe something like just rook b2, a b2, and now knight c6, rook c6, and bishop h6 is like completely holding for white, and I'm in some trouble now, I believe, because I do not have any concrete ways to win. Let's say rook c2, there's just bishop e3. But very complicated stuff. And after, actually my opponent told that after b takes a3 he was planning to go rook c3, but I think rook c3 loses. I have to think a bit what's happening here. I don't know. I mean, I saw something was there, but I am not so sure what it is now. Yeah, knight f4 is the move, knight f4, and now the point is I'm threatening to go bishop knight e2 check, and after something like bishop h6, having the bishop, knight e2 check is coming, and after this takes, I have this great move knight f5, and the point is after knight d2 I have takes, and now Now knight c4 is winning, right? Yeah, I think knight c4 is completely winning, numbing this this b1 knight, and next I'm going to play just rook b8, rook b2, and I'm completely winning in this position, I believe. This a2 a3 pawn is just so strong. And I see a funny line here. Let's say knight b4 and now rook b8. I'm threatening to take on b4 and just go a2 and queen next, and I don't think white can stop it anymore. But I went for king g7, which is a safer choice, and after rook d1, here was the most critical point of the game, and my opponent was down to 7 minutes. I had like 27 minutes on the clock, but I had considered this move, of course, b takes a3, and this was the best choice of the engine. After I checked the game with the engine with the after my game. After knight d3, there was rook knight e5, and the point is after rook c8, there's a takes b2, and after I'm threatening to queen on b1, and white has to play drop back with rook d1, but after rook c8. The engine is saying that knight d2 is there. I mean, I had seen till this position, and then I saw that there is no clear way to queen my pawn, so I just left it. But the engine says that white's knights are very passive, and my pawn gives me enough compensation and even more than compensation in this position. So like after knight d2, I could have gone for something like knight d3, and the point is I'm going to enter with rook c1. And let's say after king f1, I can go rook c1, knight takes, pawn takes, rook takes, knight takes, and it's a well-known theory in like in knight endgames. With a pawn down, it should be lost. I mean, with a pawn up, it should be winning, and but with accurate defense, I'm not so sure what is going to be the result. But it's very difficult to hold with a pawn down in knight endgames, because knight endgames are similar to pawn endgames, and being a pawn down matters, unlike in rook endgames, of course. But yeah, this is what I should have gone for, of course. But actually, I did a very big mistake here. I was playing for my opponent's time, and I played knight c5, and after rook takes, still I could have pressed on a bit more with knight takes b2, and the point is after rook a1, I actually missed this move knight ec4 here, and the thing is after a4 there's rook b8, and white's knight, either of white's knights are going to fall, and if he doesn't move that a pawn, then I'm just going to go rook 8 next and pick up the a3 pawn, and it's going to be a 4 versus 5 pawn endgames with 2 knights on each side of the board. But yeah, I really fathom my chances of winning in this position. But I played knight b4 to be on the safe side, and I thought that I could press this till death. But after rook b4, my opponent played b3. And here actually I could have gone for the best way to progress would have been king f6, first protecting the e7 pawn, and then reroute my knight to e5 d7, and actually king f6 just avoids white's plan of forking the pawn on e7 and the rook on b4 with knight c6 whenever I move the knight from e5. But in general, I should have gone for king f6, but I'm not so sure after, let's say, f3, knight d7, king e2, king f2, knight c5. Here white could have gone for something like king e2 simply, not king e3 of course, because there's e5, and whenever white moves his knight, I take on b3 with a check, and then come king e6, and I should be winning. But just king e2, let's say, and after knight b3, rook b3. I'm not so sure if this is a win, but of course I'll press this till death, and practically it should be winning for me. But yeah, this was my best try, and given my opponent was very low on time, I should have gone for this continuation. But I just messed up. I played knight d7. As I told you, I was playing for my opponent's time, and I completely missed the fact that after knight c6, rook e4, f3, I have literally no squares on the e file to protect the e7 pawn, and I went for rook e3. rook e6 looks like the only move to fight for a win, but I was a bit afraid about b4, king f6 and b5, and maybe knight b6, and still I'm not so sure. Yeah, I could have pressed in this position a bit. Yeah, maybe I could have gone for rook e3 and rook b3, but yeah, rook e6 should have been played. Yeah, rook e6 should have been played, but I went rook e3, and after king f2 I took on b3. The engine is showing something like rook c3 is working, but I don't know what its plan is after. Okay, it's just shit. Yeah, I took on b3. After knight e7 I played rook b2 check, king f1, which is a very accurate move actually. Something like king g3 doesn't work because of knight f6, and then I'm threatening to go knight h5 check. Let's say after rook e3 there's knight h5, king h3, knight f4, and the g2 pawn is falling, and I should be winning this game. But my opponent played accurately and he played king f1, which is the best move in that position, and after knight e5 my opponent played rook d6, and here I had some sudden hopes of winning the game because I saw rook b7, and the knight has to move now. Knight c6 doesn't work, of course, because rook b6 just drops the knight due to the pin, and knight c8 looks quite passive in this position. I think something like knight c4, and here, yeah, maybe even this was drawing. Yeah, rook e7, just knight d6 is coming, so even this was drawing, but knight c8 is a very hard move to find. It's kind of, the knight is going to some different some place outside of the board. Yeah, but knight d5 was the move I was anticipating, and here I had seen rook b1, rook king f2, rook b2, king g3, and now rook d2, pinning the rook to the knight to the rook. But and I thought I was clearly better, at least in this position, because I can just play something like knight c4 and knight e3 next, hitting the g2 pawn. But to my surprise, my opponent immediately dashed out with knight f6, and I was like, oh my god, I completely missed that move. And after rook d6 I offered him a draw. Yeah, we took a draw in this position, because after knight e8 something like king h6, knight d6, this is just drawn endgame with equal pawns and knights on the board. So yeah, not a very happening game for me. I wanted to grind out a win, but I messed up here in this critical position. I should have started with king f6 next first, and yeah, I think due to my opponent's low time I could have won the game, but yeah, it is what it is. I missed the move, and I completely take the blame upon myself. And yeah, 6 more rounds to go. I'm at 3 out of 4. There are 3 players at 4 out of 4, and something like 10 or 15 players with 3.5 out of 4, and still a lot of games to follow. And yeah, I think I'm at a pretty decent position in this tournament. And yeah, like tomorrow there's 2 rounds, and yeah, I hope to see you tomorrow in tomorrow's recap. And yeah, stay tuned. See you. Hare Krishna.